All right, here we go. Welcome to a Thursday edition of the Athletic Hockey Show. Get out of here, Haley, Max, and Sean Gentili. It's the real Thursday show. The way it was meant to be constructed with Ian Mendes and Mark Lazerus with you. Right?
I think I'm never supposed to be here. If I'm here, someone's either busy with real work or something important has happened, because I'm just like the guy you call when you need, like, oh crap, we need to go get Lazarus.
Yeah, the e-bug of
Exactly.
podcasting. That's what it is. But no, we're happy to be here because we're leading into the holiday season. There's a ton to get to on this Thursday where the news cycle's been going. And I know earlier this week, right? You sat in on the pod, whatever, and I was in transit because all of a sudden I had to get myself to Arizona. So
how'd that go?
It's been a week.
How was your day at Pearson?
Oh man, I got stuck on the way there and back, 3 hours each way on what should have been nice, quick connections.
There's no such thing as a nice, quick connection at Pearson.
Yeah,
Pearson is like, that's like my personal hell. Like, I will go out of my way to avoid having to connect through Pearson if I can.
Oh man, and I think what I've learned is that listeners to podcasts, they love nothing more than reporter travel stories. They're like,
there's some good ones out there. We're at the anniversary of the time I got stuck at O'Hare overnight, trying to get to Arizona. And me, Chris Cook of the Tribune, and Tracy Myers of CSN Chicago spent, we were on 3 different flights, all racing each other to get there. And Tracy didn't make it, and Cook and I had to fly to Tucson and rent a car. It was good times.
Oh, man. Did you guys go full Tom Hanks, like in the terminal, like overnight? Like you're stuck in the terminal?
We made it till about, like, I think 2 in the morning, and then I just screwed. I went and got a hotel.
Oh, man. No. Oh, no. We won't turn this into a travel story, but we will turn this into a bit of a time travel story, because I got to tell you, Laz, like being in Arizona and looking at the Ottawa bench and seeing Jacques Martin, it was like mind-blowing to me, because this is when I first started. I first broke into this industry in the early 2000s. I actually worked in the media relations department under Jacques Martin.
Is that right?
Like, so if you could imagine, that's how far back my relationship goes with him, 20-ish years. And then I switched into being a reporter and I covered him. So to see him behind the bench, like I was thinking, like this would almost be like, and we'll have a nice segue to this in a few minutes, but like this would be like if the Sabres went back at some point, they're like, you know what, Lindy Ruff is our coach again. Like that's really the only comparable I could think of. It is truly wild to see somebody back there. But I'm curious in your estimation, like when you think about whether it's players, athletes, coaches, whatever, going back for a second term somewhere, anywhere, can you think of something off the top of your head where you're like, that guy came back and it was good or as good as the first time? Like I always think of Messier to the Rangers. I'm like, they brought him back, everybody. And
when Patrick Kane's a Blackhawk again in 5 years to have his last season, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, didn't Al Arbor do that on Long Island, where he retired and then came back and they went on that playoff run in '93? Wasn't that his second go around?
Yeah,
my memory's a little fuzzy on that, but
yeah. And then Arbor actually came back to coach one ceremonial game.
That's right.
It gets what was it, 1,500, right?
Yeah. So he got a third go around. I mean, this is hockey. This is the NHL. This is the retread league, right? This is what we do.
Yeah.
We don't come up with new creative ideas. We go back to ones that worked 20 years ago. Look at everyone the Edmonton Oilers have ever hired in any job ever. They all played for the 1980s Oilers. You go back to what you know, because that's what hockey does.
Oh man, it's wild. Like, and I was looking this up too because I saw that there's a great stat that says so Jacques Martin coached his first game in the NHL, Laz, in 1986.
Jeez.
Okay. And so now it's a 37-year span between when he coached his first game and his most recent game, which is the longest span in the history of the NHL. Now, I know, like we talked about this, Arbor came back, but it was like a ceremonial game. So that doesn't really count. Like that was like almost like a PR stunt. But I went back. I looked at the box score of Jacques Martin's first game as a head coach. He coached against Marcel Dionne. Think about that. A guy in the NHL this week is coaching, and he coached against Marcel Dionne and Tiger Williams in his first game.
I remember just like a few years ago, like the grandson of like Zachary Taylor, the president from like the Civil War era of the United, he died. It's like it was only his grandson because he had kids so late in life and everyone lived so long. There shouldn't be connections to Marcel Dion in the modern NHL. I'm sorry. I have concerns about this hiring. I mean, maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I don't want to become across as an ageist here, but Jacques Martin hasn't coached in the NHL in 11, 12 years, something like that. The game has changed dramatically in that time. Can Jacques Martin, a coach who is very defensive-minded, can he succeed in the modern-day, speed-oriented, skill-based NHL? Can that translate? Is this just a stopgap, or is he really going to coach this team the rest of the year?
I think it stopgap is the right phrase because I don't think he's in this for the long haul. I think he's just
Alfredsson thing. Are we just getting to the inevitable like Marty St. Louis in Montreal?
Les, every conversation I've ever had with Alfredsson about what his role is, he was always scared off by, and this is what coaching has become, as you know. It becomes a 19 or 20 hour a day job.
Oh, it's an awful job. It's an awful
it
job.
is. It's mentally and physically taxing. You can't escape it. You have to be back in your office. If you get in at 5:30, that's a little late in the morning. Like how many staffs they have the juggle, who's putting the coffee on and who so I don't think he wants that. I don't think he wants the grind, but you know what I think is interesting? Like when they practiced this week in Arizona, Jacques Martin, the first practice, Jacques didn't even go on the ice. And it was Alfredsson. And Les, I don't think he had his skates on the trip, like Jacques Martin. So they're practicing in Denver as we're recording this. I don't even know if he'll be on the ice because I don't think he brought his skates on the trip. I don't think he was thinking, I'll take over at some point. So it's interesting, but
is there not a Dick's Sporting Goods anywhere in the state of Arizona? I mean, someone could have gotten him skates. If he really wanted skates, someone could have gotten him skates, I think.
God, wouldn't you? I would have loved to have done a feature on, hey, do you guys mind if I tag along to Dick's Sporting Goods as he picks up a pair of skates?
That'd be amazing. He's trying them on. He's like, man, these are not custom fit at all. This off the rack stuff. Welcome to the rest of our lives.
Oh, man. So, look, the coaching changes happened in Ottawa. And I think there's a great parallel between the Senators and the Buffalo Sabres in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Good young core, restless fan base. In Buffalo's case, they deserve a little bit extra, I think, kudos, that fan base, because now it's 12 years since they made the playoffs. And now you're starting to hear the rumblings of the fans saying Don Granato's got to go. And when he first came in, it was, hey, it's Donnie Meatballs and everyone loves him and he's this upbeat guy. Here we go. And boy, I don't know. The Sabres players are backing their coach like you would expect them to do. But is that like all season, Laz, there's different pressure points, right? And places. It boiled over in Edmonton. It boiled over in Minnesota. It boiled over in St. Louis. It boiled over in Ottawa. Is Buffalo the next place that it's going to boil over?
I think the biggest problem if you're Donnie Granato right now is how well it's working everywhere else. Ottawa, so far excluded, is everybody's getting that new coach bump, right? It's fixing things. You're getting temporary bumps in Minnesota and even St. Louis and Edmonton. Obviously, was a perfect example. I think a lot of GMs and ownerships they think of coaches as relatively disposable. They're like running backs. They're like backup goalies. They're just, you can kind of shuttle them in and out. So unless you have an elite top tier, John Cooper type coach, it's easy to move on from them when things are going bad. And Don Granato is really well liked by that team. Everybody likes Don Granato. He's one of the nice guys in the league, and everybody enjoys playing for him and working with him and being around him. But the Sabres are disappointing. Like you said, we talked about this on the show last time where, everyone said the Sabres, the Senators, and the Red Wings were all going to make the playoffs, and that just was never realistic. But what's happening is worse than, just being mediocre. They're being bad again in a lot of ways. And it's tough because Don Granato's not making a ton of money. They can easily swallow that contract for another couple of years by firing him. And it feels inevitable. It feels unfortunate, but it just really feels inevitable that no matter how much the players say we support our coach, what are they going to say? They're not going to say that. The results aren't there. And this was supposed to be a year that the Sabres took a leap. And we've been saying that for, it feels like millennia. And it's not happening. And if it doesn't happen, when you have a lot of talent now, it becomes an issue. And the coach is usually the first one to pay for it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the Sabres have tried everything, right? They've tried different coaches. They've tried different rosters. and they feel like they're just stuck in the same spot. I just have nothing but sympathy for Buffalo fans because they've been. It's interesting too. Like in Colorado, you wouldn't think Colorado's a pressure point where it's going to build over, but I got to tell you, those comments from Devon Toews this week, and it was against Chicago, right? Like, so you
lose to Chicago, right? You have a come to Jesus meeting. It never fails.
Yeah, it's mandatory. If you lose to Chicago, Columbus, or San Jose, it's mandatory. It's a team meeting, and then someone's got to pop off in the meeting. But Toews says, quote, I think we got some guys who think they're playing well, and I think they're kidding themselves at this point. Like you know what I love? There's nothing I love more, Laz, than sort of peer-to-peer comments like this, like peer-to-peer accountability. And I like that. If you're Toews and you feel empowered to say that, only certain guys can stand up and say that. But I love that. I love what he said this week.
And good for Toews for being willing to say that on a team full of stars that are way bigger than him, right? Like, he's a good player on a great team, but he's not one of the big guys on that team. There's 4 or 5 megastars on that team, and he's out there saying, so good for him. That said, the Avalanche are fine. They're like, I covered those great Chicago teams where they would like manufacture their own drama during the regular season because they get bored, they get complacent. No player wants to admit this, but when you're playing on like a Tuesday night or whatever it was in Chicago in late December, just before the holiday break, you kind of just mail it in sometimes because the Avalanche are in no danger of missing the playoffs. They're going to coast. They don't care what seed they are. If they're the 1 seed or the 7 seed, they're just like those Chicago teams. They can win from anywhere, and they know it. So it's really hard to get too amped up for every single game in the regular season. And no player is allowed to admit this. They admit it after they retire. I remember Patrick Sharp telling me about it, saying like, oh my God, we're in Carolina on a Wednesday night again. What the hell are we doing here? And you just kind of go on autopilot. And that's what the Avalanche are doing right now. They're going to be fine. When the games matter, a team that good, and when they're healthy again, they'll be just fine.
And Toews calls them out, and I pity their next opponent. Check schedule. It's the Ottawa Senators. Good luck. Good luck.
So the team call out versus the new coach bump. It's like the immovable object and the irresistible force.
Oh man, it's like Bo Jackson against Brian Bosworth.
Something's got to give.
Something's got to give. Okay. You know who loves 80s football references? It's our next guest. Down goes Brown. Because you know what? This guy's like, wait a minute, Bo Jackson and Brian Bosworth. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, I'm right there. I had the poster.
The Bosworth poster?
I had the Bosworth poster and I had all of them. But was Bosworth the one with like the laser like Terminator thing, or was that okay? Yeah.
I think it was
the
somebody.
I'm saying it past tense as if they're not still like upstairs in a closet somewhere ready to go.
Exactly. I used to have those posters. You know what? Didn't somebody write a column for the Athletic? At some point in the last year, an amazing on the glory days of the 80s and 90s. Those posters.
Yeah, like I don't know where those went. Like that is something I don't understand why this generation doesn't have them.
I had the John Starks dunk over the Bulls over Jordan. I think it was Cartwright maybe.
Yeah,
that was mine.
You had I had guys that I wasn't even like a fan of, but you would just get the poster because it was cool or someone gave it to you, and you're like, oh, I guess I got a Michael Jordan poster hanging in my room now. What's this guy all about? And then you became a fan of him. And I guess, I mean, if they just if we turned them into cartoons of like bored animals, then people would
they'd be NFTs, baby.
Would get into them again.
That's right. I had a Patrick Waugh poster in my room. I grew up a Habs fan, and it said it was Patrick Incroyable, and the ROY of Incroyable was kind of pulled out, and because of Patrick Waugh, and it was like the coolest thing. But you're right, like I don't know what happened. Like
I had my equivalent of that was Wendell Clark, and it was Captain Crunch. Beautiful.
But you remember even there was like a time where like teams would like have an entire team photo, like we're gonna go with Western motif.
Pat's
and everyone
Garage
would dressed up.
I had that one too. I think that one was framed. It was fantastic. Back then there were teams would do they would do these themed photo shoots. The Leafs did it, in the Pat Burns era, years in a row. Doug Gilmour, like looking cool with the leather jacket on the motorcycle and everything. And occasionally, if you were really lucky, and Laz being a Chicago guy now, all about this, they'd all get together and they'd shoot a music video.
Oh yeah,
where they would either lip sync or sing.
I still play Let's Go Mets Go from the 86 season just to annoy my kids like at least once a week.
And it was Neil Sheehy was the guy who brought that to the NHL with the Flames first. And then over to when they sent him to Washington, he had like Rod Langway and like,
well, this is what happened.
A young Scott Stevens playing saxophone. Like, what are we doing here?
These guys are so image conscious now. They're so afraid of looking silly that they don't do anything fun. Did you see the Los Angeles Chargers kicker video that went on? Zicker the kicker, and it's like a law firm video trying to get you to vote for him from the Pro Bowl. Nobody does that anymore. It was hilarious. It was great.
I loved it.
It showed personality, and nobody wants to do that anymore because God forbid you make yourself look silly.
And that's the problem, because these things looked ridiculous back in the days. They looked, I mean, you watch them now and you're like, part of you is like, okay, does this just look bad because it's 30 years later? And then no, like even at the time you'd be watching.
I try to picture the makeup sessions for some of those photo shoots,
Or like the choreography where they're like, okay, we're all going to tilt our saxophone. Like none of you are playing. You don't even have the thing near your mouth, but we're all going to tilt.
Now when they do that, they do it ironically. Like back then it was kind of unironic.
Because every time when I bring this up, someone's always like, well, remember the Avalanche did that like Imagine Dragons.
Oh God, that was bad.
They were trying to make
Dave
fun.
Landeskog staring hard into the bathroom sink.
Yeah, because it was fun, because you could guess like, okay, who on the roster is going to be a little too into this? Who on the roster is going to completely no-sell it, right? And like who's going to be in between? Like there was always like a couple of guys, like the backup goalie would be like way too into singing, and you're like, yeah, dude, you all have the same voice. Like you're clearly not singing. We know what's happening here, but it was fantastic.
Have you seen the Team Sweden video for I think it was for the Sochi Olympics? They had this. It's basically like the Swedish Motley Crue. I think they're called the Poodles.
Okay.
And it's N for Allah for N, which was their goal song. And they did the 1980s thing where they brought all the players in to sing the chorus at the end. It's first of all, the song rules. Like it's like a legitimately great like 80s style rock song. And the video is hilarious because you got like Henrik Lundqvist and you got like, all these guys out there. So you got to go. It's one of my favorite videos.
Okay. I'm going to look that up because I tell you, man, between the post, like, look what they did. Look what they took from us.
I think I massacred my
kids
boy
today. You have no idea.
Do you guys ever see this? And we'll get, trust me, we'll get on to actual fun.
Yeah,
will we? Will we?
Not necessary.
No, not necessarily. Do you guys ever see, it's from the 80s, the Buffalo Sabres anti-drug song, the rap song, and it's like Tom Barrasso and Housley
they did.
And Andrew
my name's
Chuck.
Tom Barrasso, and I'm here to say,
well, we can all think of something that rhymed with Barrasso that worked pretty well for that guy, but they did. There was a guy there, and there's one where at least one where the guy's playing the piano, and he's like a local Buffalo like celebrity comic musician, like which is a thing back then, who ended up. Don't Google how things ended up for that guy because it didn't, it's going to diminish the message. But yeah, the Buffalo Sabres were here to tell you not to do drugs. And I think it was a couple of times. I think they did it 2 years in a row. So if you've ever wanted to see like Dave Anderchuk sit you down for like a real like chat about I
think the Simpsons destroyed this with the Timmy O'Toole that we're sending our love down the well video. Like probably. I think they killed fun videos.
They may have, but I'll tell you, between the Buffalo Sabres and Saved by the Bell, I wasn't going near any drugs for a long time.
You were so excited, but you were so scared.
I was too excited for the Sabres video is what happened.
Was it Johnny Dakota telling you to say nope to dope? Okay. So yeah, I told you we would get back on track. All right. Look, you love 80s nostalgia, 90s nostalgia. All three of us do, but I know, Sean, you also love talking about the NHL and the way they handle discipline. And Dylan Larkin, who was the victim of look, it was a tough play with Matthew Joseph, and I understand the debate around it, and I totally get it. So I understand Dylan Larkin's frustration when you've had a history of neck and head injuries and all that stuff. And he kind of went off on the league this week, kind of saying, look, it's hard to feel safe the way that this league hands out discipline. Should they Department of Player Safety, Sean, take those words from Dylan Larkin to heart, or do you think they'll just be like, whatever, we're just going to spin that wheel?
I mean, I think at this point, this is well-trod ground, right? I think most of us feel like we would like to see the suspensions be stiffer. We would like to see, potentially suspensions for more things. We would all love to see the fines actually matter, as opposed to the the maximum amount in CBA, which is nothing for these guys. And yeah, I didn't like that Dylan Larkin play. I really didn't. And especially remember, he's got not just a history of this injury, he's got a history with the same player, with Matthew Joseph, having had that injury before. So I get where he's coming from. The problem is always with this discussion is everybody wants them to be stricter and tougher until it's their team. And then suddenly when it's their team, it's, oh, wait a second. I mean, come on, this guy, he's a good guy. And this is the perfect example because you got Dylan Larkin sitting there saying, hey, I have a history of these injuries. I got a history with this guy. I get, it's not a hockey play, whatever you thought it was, a punch, a stick, whatever. It's not a hockey play to come up high and hit me in the head. And you should be responsible for what happens. And maybe you didn't know that another guy was coming in when I was going to get, sandwiched and hit like that. But you're targeting my head in the run of play and it results in an injury. And yeah, there should be stiffer discipline. Great. I'm sure every Red Wings fan agrees with him. But then 5 seconds later, David Perron comes over and blatantly cross-checks a guy in the head, blatant attempt for injury. He does get the big suspension. And how many Red Wing fans are saying, well, wait a second, you can't not David Perron, right? And you got Alan Walsh on Twitter. Oh, he's a good guy. He's never been suspended before. Pick a lane. It's got to be one or the other. Yeah, yes. Dylan Larkin wants to argue, and I'm not suggesting Dylan Larkin should argue against his own teammate, stand up and, we don't expect him to do that. But if you're a Wings fan and you're saying they've got to bear down on player safety and they've got to be stricter, great. David Perron's a double-digit suspension now, if we're going by that criteria. Yep. So you got to pick both. It can't just be everybody else, and especially if it happens to my team, make it stricter. But when my team's on the other side of it, well, then it's let's not go overboard. Let the boys play hockey, old time hockey and all of that nonsense.
Yeah, I want to see this stuff out of the league completely, and I want to see the suspensions be bigger. But the problem is you're running into this inertia and nostalgia of the league. I mean, look, Kevin Kurz had a great story today on The Athletic about, John Tortorella's comments last month that this the no-hit league guy now, and guys don't know how to get hit. And as a result, they're getting injured. He's basically blaming the players for getting hurt in some ways. And it was a really nuanced story that Kevin did a really good job with. But the problem is so many people in the league are like, I want more hits. This is part of the game. And it runs counter to also we need to protect our star players. I'm much more concerned with protecting the star players than seeing it. I like seeing a good, clean hit in the league. But if I can see fewer headshots and it means I see fewer big hits, then I'm okay with that. That's a trade-off I'm willing to make. I want to see Dylan Larkin on the ice. I want to see him play hockey more than I want to see anybody go and take a run at someone, more than I want to see guys getting cross-checked in the back of the head in the crease just because it's always been allowed, more than I want to see David Perron retaliate for a hit like that. I don't want to see any of that stuff. I want to watch hockey. The problem is this league doesn't care. The league wants it to be like it was in the 70s.
Well, the league, I think the league is, and I'm the last person to defend the league, but I'll kind of go halfway to that.
Well, not the league, the people in the league, I'm saying. I think Gary Bettman wants this stuff out of the game, but your John Tortorellas don't.
I think they're caught in between because, this is very similar to the debate over fighting, right? Where we saw, fighting for years, we would argue it back and forth. And then it just kind of naturally on its own started to diminish to the point where it's at very close to an all-time low right now. It's not really part of the game anymore. Certainly not like it used to be. And great. That's better for player safety. It's better. We know too much about concussions and the injuries and the long-term effects of this stuff. So I'm all on board with that. But at the same time, the NHL minus fighting for a lot of fans is a less entertaining league. Just like the NHL without the big hits is a less entertaining league. Like when I was growing up with hockey, you went to a hockey game or you sat down to watch one. There were 4 things you were looking for. You wanted to see goals. You wanted to see big, exciting saves. You wanted to see big hits, and you wanted to see fights. And the fights are almost gone, and the big hits are almost gone. And the big, exciting saves are almost gone because these goalies are all giants now, and they just, flop down and let the puck hit them in the chest. And the goals have dropped. So, if I'm the NHL, and I'm always the one saying, whenever the NHL has to make a decision, I'm going, guys, you're an entertainment product. Don't forget the entertainment. For a lot of fans, and absolutely, Mark, there's a lot of fans out there like you too who say seeing this stuff takes away my entertainment. And obviously no one wants to see guys get hurt. But there's a lot of fans that would say, you've taken away the fighting, you take away the hitting. There's not enough there that it's still fun. And I guess the last thing I'd say on that, we started with the 80s and 90s nostalgia. Go back and watch a hockey in the 80s and 90s. You can argue there's too much of this crap today. And I'll be right there with you. Don't ever say that the league hasn't greatly diminished this stuff or that the game doesn't have a lot of it, whoever you want to give the credit to. There is stuff now that we debate for a week, whether this was a clean or dirty hit, that was not even noticed in the 1980s or 90s. It wouldn't even have made the highlights. But the hit now happens and we talk about it and we argue about it. I saw it today. I saw a back and forth where somebody was getting mad on Twitter saying it's so ridiculous to say the league has taken a lot of the dirty crap out. Go back and watch what it was 20, 30 years ago. And yeah, that's a low bar.
Well, yeah, watch Billy Smith or Ron Hextall in the crease just whacking at guys' ankles.
I'm not trying to be a wise ass here. Go watch a rivalry game in 1989. You will see more violence and dirty hits and fights and everything than you will see an entire week of a full NHL schedule today.
I think that's as much to do with the evolution of the players as the evolution of the game, though, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, and some of it is rule changes, and some of it's how they officiate, and obviously not all of it. That's how it was with fighting, right? We used to always debate: do they need to pass a rule to get rid of fighting? Do they need a rule? Because that's the only way it's ever going to change. Is if they, Gary Bettman has, or whoever it is, has to make a rule, and they never made a rule, but it kind of on its own diminished. Same thing's happening with hitting. But I get where, from an NHL standpoint, hey, man, when you watch a commercial for an NHL game or a video game or anything with the NHL, they're not showing poke checks. They're not showing shot blocking. They're showing big hits and violence. And that's part of the selling point of the game. And if it all goes away, and maybe it should, but what are you left with? How do you still market this game?
I feel like that's a false equivalency, though, right? Because you can eliminate getting cross-checked in the back in the crease and still have open ice hits, still have guys getting smeared along the boards in a non-boarding fashion. Like it's a sliding scale, but there are clear delineations between the kind of stuff that nobody's excited about seeing what happens in the net front. That's not a fun, exciting play. And that's not Jacob Trouba destroying a human being.
I am with you on that, but I do think that's
what happened to Dylan Larkin. It was a seemingly innocuous standard, get 1,000 times a night cross-check to the back of the head. It just happened to knock him out cold where we thought he had died on the ice.
Yep, absolutely. But at the same time, what I'll push back for you is this idea that, I still love a big open ice hit. Do you? What if the guy gets knocked out? What if the guy gets a separated shoulder, or, breaks a collarbone on that big hit? Do we still like it then? And we've seen, we've seen big hits where we're sitting there going frame by frame. Okay, was this a big clean hit, or was this a dirty hit that needs to be a 10-game suspension? It's very easy to say, take all this stuff out, but I still love the big clean hits. John Tortorella, as much as I hate to say it, I see where he's coming from on this idea that if you take all the other stuff out, suddenly these guys maybe aren't ready for that big open ice hit.
Yeah, it's like Jacob Trouba being 6'8". Like when he delivers a clean hit, it's a headshot to most guys, right?
Yep.
Yeah, but hey, listen, I remember when I worked at Sportsnet and we had the we were a national broadcaster. We had games, and so before the season, they actually brought all of us to Toronto. This would have been around 2012, and they brought Brendan Shanahan in to speak with us about this exact topic: about what's a clean play, what's a clean hit, what's a dirty hit, how do we do suspensions? And you guys remember this? Shanahan came in and he was like, "You're getting 20 games." You're getting 20 games, and we're going to curb this thing. What happened? That lasted 6 weeks.
Everybody hated it.
Everybody hated it. So for the crowd that says, if you gave them a 20-game suspension, none of this would happen. Brendan Shanahan tried to do that, and there was just too much pushback, right?
Same thing when people say, just call the rule book. Call the rule book. And if you got to call 10 power plays a game on each side, do it. They'll figure it out. We did that in 2005, 2006. Scoring went up because the entire game was played on the power play, and everybody hated it. You liked it when your team was getting the power play, but the rest of the time you're like, this is nonsense. Let them play hockey. So careful what you wish for, I guess. And, yes, obviously, if you started doing 20-game suspensions and you stuck with it for a few years, then the message gets through and the behavior changes. But you won't get that far. You won't get that far without people losing their minds, because all of us, we all pat ourselves on the back. I'm so forward thinking with this stuff. Yeah, until it's your team, and then you fall back on, well, but that's not how they call it for everyone else, so it's okay when my team does it too. Well, you know what? Pick a side, pick a lane, and most people pick the lane of whatever works for my team in a given moment.
Okay, as we let you go, I think, and I apologize to our producer Jeff for throwing this last second, but I think Jeff says he's got a picture of Pat's garage with the Maple Leafs that I think we could possibly show here on the way. Look at this.
Cool.
This is old-timey posters of the 90s. The Toronto Maple Leafs. So what year is this, Sean? 93?
This, I believe, is 93 or maybe 94.
What a time to be alive.
Look at this photo.
That's Gilmore on the motorbike. There is a song too. You can find that on YouTube. Glenn Anderson, The Leafs Are the Best. Mike Myers makes a guest appearance. It's okay. So this is 94. Pat's Garage was 93. The gangster one here is 94, I want to say.
What trophies are those hanging up there?
That would be the conference champion. No, not the. That's the
division
Selke
title
and the Jack Adams.
Jeez.
That's
Pat Burns and Doug Gilmore won the awards.
that is the most Toronto thing I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, that's
other teams are doing it too. I'm just
but just having those trophies there.
But when my team does it, it's okay, Mark. Where you're not paying attention to the whole thing, it's not cool for other teams. But when my team does it, it's fine.
Exactly. All right. Always great to have you drop by. We love the nostalgia. What do we have? What references to Brian Bosworth and
Bo Jackson. I think we
got
Jim Everett in there.
Smarts
I don't know. I think we had him too.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. All right. Hey, listen, happy holidays to you and the family, and we'll get you again at some point next week, or I think we're going to be doing a best of show. So we'll get you in there for that too.
All right. Thanks, guys.
There he goes. Down goes Brown. Sean McAdoo joining us as he does on a weekly basis here on the Athletic Hockey Show. All right. We've swapped out Down Goes Brown and brought in Eric Duhatschek from Calgary. Eric, we were just chatting about, and I think maybe you saw it too because you were kind of in the waiting room. Yeah. What happened to those great posters of the 80s and the 90s?
I don't know. And I think part of the problem is that, the world changed around us. Mark writes about this all the time. When I started covering hockey in 1980-81, we traveled with the team. We were, handed boarding cards. It was commercial flights, no charters. Al Coates was the travel secretary, and you got handed a boarding card just like the player beside you. And often you sat beside the player, right? So how do you develop relationships with players today? I don't know. How I developed them in the first 10 years that I covered hockey was I'd be sitting next to Kerry Wilson, and he'd be studying his medical text, and we would talk about it, and I got to know his family, and he got to know mine. And it was just, it felt more like you had relationships with people. And I think that the teams thought of it that way. There was a certain, the business was small, right? Gary Bettman came in 93 and hockey became big business. And prior to that, there was something more, like individual entrepreneur feel about it. And so that kind of stuff happened. I mean, you talk about nostalgia. Okay. I'm the king of nostalgia. My favorite thing, Mark, is that Chicago Blackhawks Christmas carol where Frolic Navidad.
Oh yeah, that was a famous one.
Frolic, and that was fun too. And that was 2012, 13, somewhere around there. So
early 2010s, yeah.
Yeah, so people have had fun since the 1990s.
And there's still some of that on on social media.
Yeah,
there's teams that'll do that, but it's done like that one where it's done kind of ironically, where it's not like, look how cool we are. We're in Pat's garage. It feels like they really meant it back in the 80s,
Yeah. Well, look at the New York Rangers, the hockey sack. And that was just more of a thing there because it just felt like the NHL 21 teams, it just felt clubbier. And that over time changed, and and we are where we are today. So I liked it better in the old days too, but it was mostly because I always go back to this. How do you write effectively about someone if you don't know them, right? So there was always a fine line where it helped to know the names of the players' wives and their kids and their birthdays, and you just felt like you were writing about somebody that you knew, but there was you couldn't cross the line. To me, you could not have a friendship with a player because there were times when you would write something critical about them, and and the next day they're sitting on the plane beside you reading your story in the newspaper where you're letting them have it. I mean, that happened 10 times, 12 times. But it always gave you a good opportunity to discuss what you did for a living. And I used to have this argument with Gary Roberts all the time. Roberts would say, all you guys ever do is criticize. And I say, no, we critically evaluate. I said, there is a small nuanced difference, because critically evaluating means when you play well, I write that you play well. And when you play poorly, I say you play poorly. And that's just what the job is. And, you know, he would sit there and digest it, and we'd go back and forth. But you know, you had an opportunity to say those things. And I always think about the issues sometimes that, you know, that reporters have with players. It's because nobody gets to communicate. People are standing there in a scrum, and there's a question, there's an answer, there's a question and an answer. Is that it? And then away they go. And you know, how do you converse with someone? How do you let them know a little bit about yourself? Anyway, it was different, and it was more fun, I think, then. Hockey doesn't seem to be a lot of joy in the sport right now. It just seems very clinical to me.
Yeah. You know, I always say it's you want to build with athletes, build relationships, not friendships, right? And if you can do that, you can be accountable to them and all that. You know, this actually an easy segue into this. We're talking about spanning the decades or whatever. I said this to Laz earlier. It's crazy. Jacques Martin, his first game that he coached in the NHL was against Marcel Dion and Tiger Williams. And on Thursday night, he'll be up against Cale Makar and Nate McKinnon. So think about that. Think of the span of that. I want to segue into Jaromir Jagr. And I always thought this was a cool stat about Jagr. He's the only guy to ever play against Guy Lafleur and Connor McDavid. So you want to talk about spanning generations. That's what Jagr did. But he's back in the news cycle because he's kind of back playing in his hometown, and this punts his Hall of Fame eligibility again. And Laz and I don't know where you fall on this, Eric, because you obviously have a great institutional knowledge of the Hockey Hall of Fame and the voting process. At 51, why can't we make Jaromir Jagr eligible for the Hall of Fame?
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with that. And in the past, the Hall of Fame has made exceptions for players, you know, and waived the 3-year eligibility rule. In you know, Wayne Gretzky's case, you know, like he was inducted 5 minutes basically after he retired, and he was the only player inducted that year. And eventually they changed that rule, and they stopped making exceptions because of the number of players who had unretired. Mary Lemieux was one, Guy Lafleur was another, and they felt that it was a little bit of embarrassing to have somebody in the Hall of Fame, you know, and still playing. So I think at that point they had made a decision that they do it at the director level, that they wouldn't make an exception for anyone. I guess my counterpoint would be, like, what's the difference? I mean, Jaromir Jagr is a Hall of Fame player, and I think that when the committee meets, when he finally does go 3 years between his last appearance in a organized game and his eligibility, it'll, you know, there'll be 18 eyes around the room because it's an 18-member selection committee, and probably a show of hands, and they won't have to go through the formal process because everyone knows he's a Hall of Famer. So whether he goes in the class of, like, if he hadn't played this year, he would be eligible 3 years from now in 2026 or 2027 or 2029. At some point, he does go in. You know, Dominik Hasek was the same thing. Like, he kept resetting his goalposts. You know, a player who hasn't got in who kept resetting the goalposts was Theo Fleury, because he went and played in England. I just don't have an issue with it. To me, it doesn't matter what year he goes in. But we were talking about fun. I think that in this particular case, because he is so unique, that I'd be completely on board with that. And by the way, if you want, I can actually tell you a Jagr story, because, you know, when you think about when he first started, I saw him play a game a year before he got drafted, and that was more complicated then because Czech players were, you know, like Czechoslovakia had just become the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And in 1989, Calgary Flames, team that I was covered, made a 17-day tour of Czech Republic and Russia. And that was after they'd won the Stanley Cup, and they were going to Moscow to pick up Sergei Makarov, who was coming to join them as a 33-year-old rookie. But before that, they spent a week in Prague, and they played 2 games against the Czech national team. And in the second game, the Czech rookie line was scheduled to play. And that was Robert Reichel, Bobby Halik, and a guy named Jaromir Jagr that, you know, we were starting to hear hints about because he was draft eligible the next year. So we went out to the Czech training center in Příbram, and because we wanted to talk to Robert Reichel. No one had spoken to him at his draft, and the interpreter, Jan Yanda, introduced us to Reichel, and George Johnson and I was there, my colleague at the other paper. We spent about 10 minutes talking to him, but we watched the practice. And one of the things that they did at the practices in those days was that the young players had to pick up all the pucks at the end of practice. So we're there with the interpreter, and there's Jagr, Halik, and Reichel bending down and gathering all of the pucks and carrying them off the ice. And it's like, wow, that is old school. And then we're interviewing Reichel, and this tall guy walks by, and it's the spitting image of Mario. And I go, is that Jagr? And he goes, the interpreter goes, yeah, that's Jagr. And I'm thinking, this guy is massive. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, like, why this guy's going to go first overall, even though, in those days, it wasn't clear when these young Czech players would be able to come over. And then, of course, Quebec had the first pick that year, and Pierre Pagé was running the team. He took Owen Nolan. I asked him afterwards, I said, this Jagr guy, he's huge. And why wouldn't you take him? Well, when are we going to get him? Well, Pittsburgh took him and got him right away. And, can you imagine if Jaromir Jagr had been drafted by that Quebec team that had young Joe Sakic, young Matt Sundin, Peter Forsberg coming along the line? That could have potentially been maybe the greatest team of all time if history had been a little bit different. So, and that was in 1989, and here we are in 2023, and we're still talking about Jaromir Jagr playing.
My first job out of school was covering the Penguins in the spring of 2001. I graduated early, and I got a job out in Penn, and that was Jagr's last year in Pittsburgh. He was already in his 11th season in the NHL, and I was just starting out, and I'm an old man, and he's still playing. It's kind of incredible. The Blackhawks opened the season 4 years ago in Prague, and I rented a car and popped over to Kladno, and I visited him, and I did a story on him. And to me, this whole Hall of Fame thing is very silly. To say what he's doing is playing organized hockey is a bit of a stretch. He is the owner of the team who needs to sell tickets. Yeah. And God bless him. He's out there 3 times a day on the ice practicing with his weighted vest and his weighted anklets and all that stuff. And he's still got the big, huge ass that bounce all the goals off of. He's still a horse out there. And you saw that great play he made that was going around on Twitter the other day. He made that assist. But he is a novelty act as much as anything in Kladno right now. I know it's the Hockey Hall of Fame and not the NHL Hall of Fame. I get that. But he's 51. He's never playing in the NHL again. Let's just put him in the Hall already.
Yeah. It would be like keeping Spaceman Lee out of some, baseball institution because he's still pitching slow pitch somewhere or whatever. Yeah. So, Eric, I want to ask you one other thing here before we let you go, and that's the Calgary Flames. And you're in that market. You can see what's happening there. They might be the most interesting team to monitor in the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And they got a brand new general manager, brand new head coach. But what's Craig Conroy up to here? Well, what's going to happen in Calgary as we get closer to the trade deadline?
Well, so if you look at Chris Johnson's trade board, he had 4 Flames right at the top of it. One of them got traded already. That was Nikita Zadorov. The remaining 3 are all players that can help a team that thinks they can win a Stanley Cup, potentially win a Stanley Cup. So it's Elias Lindholm, who not that long ago was the center of what we considered the top line in hockey when Johnny Gaudreau was on the one side and Matthew Tkachuk on the other. You've got Chris Tanev, who the other night blocked 10 shots and is just this unbelievable warrior who can just, can just grind out the defensive minutes and just like one of the bravest players I've ever seen. And Noah Hannafin, who, came over to Calgary in the same deal with Lindholm from Carolina, who became a much better all-around defenseman than I thought. When he first arrived, I thought there were issues with his hockey sense, and I saw a little bit of Dougie Hamilton in him, and he's just really rounded into a very good NHL defenseman. So all around expiring contracts, all around very attractive contracts. None of them make $5 million a year. They're, 2 of them are 4.85, 4.95, and I think 10 of it's 4.5. So, we're approaching the midway point of the season. Half the dollars are going to be clicked off by January 6th or 7th, and they're available. Now, there's a difference between being available and making a deal. So of the 3, I think the first one probably who will be traded will be Lindholm. But you have to create a market for him. So you hear Colorado, of course they want him. Colorado's got a chance to win the Stanley Cup this year. Ryan Johansson just flat out is not a number 2 center. I don't think Colorado can win unless they bring in someone that can play in the top 6 and anchor that second line the same way that Kadri did the year that they won. So to me, that's the logical fit. And then it's a question of, are they prepared to give up what it takes to get him? I think, here, Boston Bruins, I think, have a clear need for Lindholm. The sense is that they're just not prepared to pay the price for him. And then, who doesn't need a defenseman when it comes time to push for the playoffs? So, one of those defensemen likely will end up in Toronto, probably Tanev, because, the manager in Toronto signed Tanev originally for Calgary. I think the Flames haven't completely given up on signing either Tanev or Hanifin. I think that Lindholm has priced himself out of their price range, and he will be traded for sure. I think one of the other two will be traded, and there's a possibility that whichever one isn't traded might sign in Calgary.
Man, yeah, it's going to be fascinating with those guys. And the market for Lindholm should be through the roof if and when he's they're ready to move him. Eric, as always, great to have you on. Happy holidays to you and your family, and hopefully we can get to do this again in 2024 with you at some point.
All right, my pleasure.
There he goes, Eric Duhatschek. Always great to get him. And those are just some. Oh man, I would just sit down. I would sit down and just listen to Eric Duhatschek talk about media and reporting and kind of the great stories from the 80s, right? Like it's just
I've done that at a bar once or twice.
Yes.
Right down with hat and let him
best.
go. It's just the best.
Yeah, absolutely the best. All right, let's wrap up this Thursday pod. Boy, this was a weird story this week involving Nolan Patrick, who, I mean, second overall pick, just 2017, so not that long ago, second overall pick. And there's a story out, Nolan Patrick has retired. I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. But then Global News on Wednesday, Laz said, we've reached out to the family of Nolan Patrick. 25-year-old, he's not retiring. Elliot Friedman reporting that he did reach out to Nolan Patrick Thursday. He declined to talk, but he did say he is not officially retired. So I don't know I don't know if this is like one of those, Tom Brady, did he retire? Did he not retire deal? But you just hope that the young man is in a good space, because it has been a tough go for him with concussions and a career that just never got traction. But isn't it weird that a guy that people would say, oh, he retired, and then actually, no, hold on, he didn't retire?
Well, I mean, that's speaking of the changing media landscape. I mean, stories come out and, we don't know whether they're true or not half the time until it's confirmed by someone that, that we do know, or that the player himself comes out and says something. We see that all the time now with, Shohei Ohtani going to Toronto. I mean, you never know what to believe anymore. But I think I'm assuming that someone just got some wording wrong and talking about somebody. I mean, it's entirely plausible that Nolan Patrick will never play in the NHL again, right? Given everything he's dealing with, it's entirely possible he doesn't play hockey again. But he's only 25, and head injuries and concussions, they're an odd thing. Like, you don't know. Like, someday you might wake up and feel good again, and you might be able to start training again. And we saw this with Jonathan Toews and long COVID, where he thought he might be done forever, and then he was able to come back and play a couple of seasons, and now he's deciding whether he wants to do that again. You could say Jonathan Toews is retired, but he hasn't retired. And we don't know what his plans are because he hasn't told anybody. And I think that's where Nolan Patrick is these guys, especially at 25 years old, you don't want to give up the hope, right? So he could just be mulling his options, wondering about his future, and someone misheard something. I don't know how the story came about, but it's entirely plausible, and I can understand how it can get some traction given his history.
Let's read a couple of emails. I got to read a couple of emails here to wrap up the show as well. As Ted writes to us, good morning from Kingston, Ontario. Now that Puckdoku is tracking user stats as to which players you have guessed the most, I'm interested to hear, when you guys play, who are your go-to guesses? My top 12? This is from Ted. Wendell Clark, Paul Correa, Doug Gilmour, Adam Oates, Chris Gratton, Jose Theodore, Owen Nolan, Ed Belfour, Mike Keane, Dave Andrechuk, Lyle Odeline, Kirk Muller. I feel like my list is the tell me you're old without telling me you're old list. I'm just interested in what Gen X groups will go with Puck Doku, Gen Z, if that's what Julian is, or Gen Z, I guess as they say in Canada, Laz. Love the show. Thanks for keeping me entertained and informed during my work days. Ted from Kingston. Well, we won't go through your top 12, but if you play Puck Doku, who's like a guy that automatically is in your list?
I gave up on Puck Doku. I was terrible at it. That an immaculate grid.
Really?
I don't understand it. I have a head for this stuff, but like I look at the grid and like my brain goes blank. Like I do Gordle every morning. I'm much better with the word games. I always get Gordle on within 4 or 5 tries. Like that's my go-tos are McDavid, Lemieux, Gretzky, Janssen to start every single time, and I'm gold. Puck Doku, I have like I get panicked and I get into like the sweats and I start feeling like I'm ashamed of myself for being so bad at it. And I was doing so bad, so I gave up because I was starting to question my self-worth playing it.
Really? Man,
I was so bad at it.
I think it's right up your alley.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm so bad at it.
Yeah, I'm with the emailer here, Ted from Kingston. Yeah, a couple of those names are guys that I Adam Oates. Adam Oates is a good one for like Anaheim and Edmonton, like a couple places.
Are we talking about just guys you guess when you don't have an answer? Guys who just been on a lot of teams?
Or just your popular guesses. But like, yeah, those are the guys that, like, or Jose Theodore in Minnesota, like the guys who were sneakily played somewhere.
Yeah,
Brett Hull in Arizona is always a good one. Guys that only just played somewhere. Marty Brodeur in St. Louis.
Every time there's Islanders Rangers ones, I pick Rich Pilon, and it's like 0.1%.
Oh yeah,
a few times.
McIndoe and I always joke about how was there a guy? Imagine today, in the age of social media, and the defenseman, and his name is Rich Pilon. And imagine the abuse he would take as this
I think that's why he was
Pilon.
a tough guy, right? He probably had to deal with that stuff growing up so bad. It's like being named like, I don't know, like Dick Johnson or something in high school. You have to learn to defend yourself. I think that's how Rich Pilon, he had to pronounce it Pilon for one thing, and then he had to beat up a lot of guys along the way. I think that's how he got to the NHL.
Oh man, you know what my go-to game is in the morning to kind of get my brain going? And this isn't just a blatant New York Times cross promotion, but I'm all about connections.
I love connections. Yeah,
connections is my game.
I wake up and I do Wordle, Gordle, and Worldle, which is guessing a country based on its shape and then its neighbors. That's how I get my brain going in the morning. Then later in the day,
I would be
I get into the New York Times suite and I do Letterboxd and I do the crossword puzzle and I do spelling bee and all that. I got to be a little sharper for connections.
Oh man,
can't do that first thing.
Okay, real quick here. Let me sneak this one in from Zach from Tennessee because it kind of comes up your alley. Because it has a Chicago theme to it. Zach says, first time writing into the show, longtime listener and a fan. My question is, why aren't teams calling about Phil Kessel? He's got 992 career points, still holds the league's Ironman streak. I don't see why a team like Chicago doesn't take a shot with Phil the Thrill. He's not that old. And so, he goes on to say, look, I think Phil Kessel deserves to get to 1,000 points. He might be a nice fit somewhere. Love the show. Keep up the great work. Your show makes my quiet overnight shifts bearable. That's from Zach in Tennessee. Thanks for the note, Zach. Glad we can help out making those shifts a little bit more enjoyable. So, Phil Kessel, why hasn't anybody signed him, and would he be a fit in Chicago?
I mean, his name has certainly come up among Chicago fans over the last couple of months because God, Connor Bedard needs some help, right? He needs people that can play with him. What he's doing, with considering the line mates he's had this year, is even all the more remarkable. And it's scary to think what he'll be able to do when he has guys that can play with him. He has guys that are third, fourth liners that have been playing with him for much of the season. And maybe Lucas Reichel will come out of his slump and be that guy. But yeah, I'm on board with this. I talked to Kyle Davidson, the Blackhawks GM, just last week in Seattle. And this is my first question for him is, why aren't you getting Connor Bedard help? And look, I don't know what Phil Kessel, what he has left in the tank, but he would be very cheap. He just wants to play. Skating was never an issue for him. He should be able to keep up, right? And if you get everyone likes Phil Kessel, you get him 1,000 points. You get to have a ceremony. You get to sell some tickets. Like there's no harm. He wouldn't be holding anybody back. That's a long-term part of the future here. The Blackhawks I do think they're obligated to get Connor Bedard some help. I don't know if Phil Kessel really qualifies. But considering what they've been trotting out with him for much of the season, I mean, Phil Kurashev is like a third, fourth liner. Ryan Donato is the guy right now. Nick Foligno has been really good this year, but that's not what they signed him to be, a top line left wing. Get him some help. And the Blackhawks are not willing to make a trade to do so. They're not willing to give up futures for this. Phil Kessel wouldn't cost them anything, and God knows they've got cap space to burn. So why not? Let's do it. Give me something to write about. I'm bored. Give me something.
Yeah, Phil. Okay, listen, Kessel being the Iron Man, Kessel getting 1,000 points, all that would give you plenty of stuff to write about. All right, so thanks for that note from Zach from Tennessee. That's a perfect place for us to end the podcast. We want to let people know that this week coming up on the weekend, Max Boltman, Corey Pronman with the World Junior Hockey Championships around the corner, the Athletic Hockey Show Prospect Series with Max and Corey. New episode will drop on the weekend, so look out for that. Listen, thanks for doing this. This was a ton of fun to spend the hour with you here.
Always, man. Always happy to be the stopgap, the Jacques Martin of the Athletic Hockey Show.
I love it. I love it. And we want to say to all of our listeners, listen, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year from the entire crew here at the Athletic Hockey Show. Happy holidays, because we appreciate like those notes that we got from Zach in Tennessee. It's those types of notes that really make us feel good about what we do here and keeping you entertained. So we want to wish all of you who listen to the Athletic Hockey Show a happy and safe holiday season. So that does it for the Thursday podcast. I want to remind you that if you're just looking for that last minute gift and you're like, oh my God, it's December 22nd and I haven't bought that certain something for somebody in my life, we want to let you know that from now to the end of the year, you can gift a 1-year subscription to the Athletic for $19.99 or a 2-year subscription for $39.99 when you visit theathletic.com/hockey show.